had known Steve, or known about Steve, since about 2012, when I was a youth pastor at Richardson East Baptist Church over in Dallas area. He was a missionary that the church had been supporting for years and years before I got there. And they kept talking about this Steve guy. And finally, when I met Steve, it was an instant connection. Maybe he just feels bad that my son is a Cowboys fan. I don't know what it is but I think Steve actually likes me. So when somebody likes me, I like them back. That's just the way it works. But in all seriousness, he's been a real good blessing in my life. Not only in a spiritual way and encouraging me to be a better disciple of Jesus and a better person who seeks to disciple other people, but he's also been a blessing in my own personal life. So, Steve, come on up, brother. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. Good morning.
Are you good? You ready to go? You fired up?
I'm good. I told you I got my coffee today.
Yep.
I'm good to go.
I was showing him my wife's coffee. She had the big cup again, and then Steve also did too. So Steve is perky, and he's ready to share with us today. Anyways, tell us a little bit about who you are. They might be like, who is this strange guy? Tell us about who you are, a little bit about your family, and what is Silk Road Catalyst? What do you guys do?
So as you said, I was partially supported by Richardson East Baptist when we were missionaries. So they've been supporting us a long, long time. We served in Asia for a period of time. My wife, prior to getting married, served in Europe for about 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Working with immigrants that came in from North Africa and the Middle East.
Right.
And then my wife is Puerto Rican, a nice Latina lady. And then we've got 2 kids, half and half. And now we live, I was born in Garland, Texas. Grew up in Plano, lived in Arlington, and now I'm here in South Carolina.
Well, we won't hold that against you that you're in South Carolina. But all my South Carolinians who are listening, no disrespect. But anyways, we won't hold that against you there, Steve.
What's interesting is when I moved here, I did not know this, but South Carolinians are huge Cowboy fans.
Are they really?
I think there's probably more Cowboy fans where I live than Panthers.
Wow, you wouldn't think that's interesting.
I want to live.
Yeah, and I had met your wife. She is a sweet lady, and your family is just an awesome testimony of the grace of God, and just an awesome example of good kids. And so you've done good, Steve, in that department, man. The Lord's really blessed you guys.
Yeah. So now to the other part of your question about Silk Road Catalyst. So the gist of it is we are a disciple-making church planting organization. We work in Asia. Currently, we're working, we've got manpower in 3 countries. We're working on a 4th country with someone in training already to go, but they'll be delayed due to the pandemic.
Right.
We're currently serving in Houston for the next year among a Muslim people group that's in Houston, Texas, until they can get abroad. So we primarily work in the past, my family and I, we worked among atheists in Asia. And then our team currently works, various teams work with Hindus, Muslims, as well as with house churches in East Asia, doing missionary mobilization in East Asia, not mobilization from the U.S. to the rest of the world, but
right.
Working to mobilize the rest of the world to the places that need the gospel.
Yeah, Steve, that is a philosophy that your organization has that is really unique. And can you kind of tell us a little bit about your philosophy of, not the West to the rest, but tell us about that.
So my philosophy isn't so much about highlighting one group over another,
right?
So much as it is getting the whole church involved in the whole mission. So if we, predominantly, as most people know, the majority of foreign missionaries are Western, whether they come from the U.S., Australia, Europe. We tend to be the ranking members of the missionary community. For many years and decades, when you hear speakers, when you go to conferences, the leaders tend to be from a Western context. Now that's changing some, but most organizations are led by either Americans, British, maybe a few Australians, and a few others. But predominantly, they're not from Asia. They're not from Latin America, unless it was an organization that was started in those regions. But they are not the majority of organizations that exist. So while I don't want to say that one is more needed than the other, because they're not. We do tend to focus more on mobilizing the non-Western faith. We don't forsake our American brothers and sisters, but we want to put a bigger emphasis on those countries where there's a growing missions movement, but they just don't have necessarily the logistics and the pathways to get to the field. And we want to work with them to get them mobilized.
And I love that approach. And it's not that we don't need to be caring about missions and going overseas, but we also need to allow those national groups to continue to serve their own country. And that's a good thing to do. And that's what your group does, right? Y'all kind of undergird the work that's going on in where God's working in countries. Is that correct?
Well, it's kind of both ends. So, some of our people work within their own community. A few of them do. But some of them, even those in South Asia, they may be considered nationals, but they're not actually working among their own people.
Oh, right.
So they would be just as much of a foreign missionary as I would be.
Right.
They're just closer to the culture than I am. So it's not really about, I do believe nationals need to do the work, but there's so many places where there are no nationals. There's not enough nationals. And it does require outside help to be able to get the gospel into those places.
And one of the unique things about your ministry is, I didn't know this until I met you, and I know we're going a different direction than we had planned. But tell us about the Hui group in China. People don't realize that there are Muslims in China. Tell the Motivation family a little bit about that. And some people don't know that. I didn't know that until I met you.
Mm-hmm. So it depends on who you talk to, what the figures are. There's a number of people I know that will claim that there's close to 100 million Muslims in China.
Right.
Regardless whether it's 100 million or not, there's a lot. There's definitely millions and millions of Muslims in China. There's two main groups of people. They're, like you mentioned, the Hui people.
Right.
And they look Chinese. And then there's the Uyghur, who don't look Chinese and don't speak Mandarin at all.
Right.
And so, but the Hui people are roughly 15, on an official number, 15 million people. Some people say up to 50 million people. And, 15 officially, maybe it's hard to know how many believers, maybe 2,000,
right.
Maybe up to 5,000 believers. But across China, there's Hui communities in roughly 2,500 cities.
Wow.
Big and small cities. So if you can imagine anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000, at least in the middle range of Christians among the Hui, that's an average of one Christian per community.
Wow.
And some of those communities, in one specific place, there's 150,000 Hui. So if you can imagine 150,000 people and one Christian and no church.
Did you guys catch that, Motivation family? That's a lot of people for one Christian to cover. And you see why it's so important that we in America really grasp the how big this really is. It's a big task that we have been called to do. And so, Steve, why should we care about what's going on in Asia? I mean, we got a lot going on in America. We got rioters in the street. We got political unrest. We got COVID-19. So why should I here in Dallas, Texas, care about what's going on in Asia? Why do I care?
Well, in terms of the church and the Christian community, I think the number one answer I came up with was because they're family. You know, our spiritual family, eternally speaking, we're more tied to each other than our flesh and blood family.
Absolutely.
And so because we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, we are all, you know, we all share the same blood. And I would say that's the number one reason why we should care about the church and why we should care about what happens in Asia, just in general.
Right.
We're a global society. I mean, you can see with the pandemic when China shut down how it affected. Now, we didn't necessarily feel all the effects over here all at once. It was a trickle down effect. And in some ways, we're still pretty well off compared to a lot of the world. But, you know, there was impact on businesses. There was impact on supply chains. It impacted everything. So we should care about what's happened. We should care how governments are impacting their people. We should care about our brothers and sisters in India who are under lockdown, and some of them are running out of, you know, I talked to one recently who told me in 2 days I'm going to run out of food.
Yeah, and I don't know if people have seen the video of the migrants who were just fleeing the city. What city was that? It was one of the cities. We'll just leave it at that. And they were all fleeing, and it looked like thousands and maybe 1 million people in my estimate. There's a lot of people have been displaced in India, and that is just, we should care about that. And we need to understand just how massive the population is in other parts of the world. We have 300 million maybe in America, and they had a billion over there in India, I believe is what's the estimate in India population there, Steve?
It's 1.3 to 1.4 billion.
Yeah, think about that, guys. I mean, that's a lot of folks, and those a large portion of those people had never heard the gospel, and they'd never heard about Jesus. And as Steve says, you got one person for 150,000 people, and that's the ratio there. Do it, you mathematicians, do that. Tyler, do that for us, our architect friend. So how has COVID-19 hindered your work, Steve? Because you can't travel. How has that hindered your work, and how has it helped?
The only thing it's really hindered is me being able to be face to face with our people.
Right.
And that definitely is a struggle for me, because while I can see them, you see their face on Zoom, it's not a good substitute long term.
Right.
And I just prefer to deal with some things face to face. It's also easier to deal with communication face to face, because you can read body language. So, you know, there's a little bit of struggle with that. The upside of it and how it changes is causing us to think through, you know, how do we move forward? This pandemic isn't, you know, even my personal doctor says this is probably not the last one in my lifetime. You know, if I live a long enough life, you know, they will come, or crises will come to some degree. So we need to be able to think through, you know, how are we going to adjust? How are we going to adapt? And I don't think anyone's got a lot of answers right now. I think most mission organizations are still asking these questions, but you know, these are questions we're going to have to answer, and we're going to have to rethink, you know, what is really the best way. You know, when we send an American, what do we need to do if something happens, when a crisis happens, not just in the traditional ways of terrorism, or in fact, I heard a guy this morning say our crisis plans were more in line with what happens when there's a terrorist attack, what happens when there's an earthquake or a hurricane or something like that. But never has anyone thought, what's going to happen if there's a pandemic?
Yeah, I know. I wasn't thinking about this, and you know, after Christmas and January and February, things were going great, you know, and the only sadness we had was Kobe Bryant, you know, was killed in the helicopter crash. And then after that, everything just exploded, and here we are in this new COVID-19 world, and it's really affecting missionaries. And I really want my Mother Nation family to understand the impact that this is having. Just think about the impact on your family and your community and your church, and just times that, times 10 or more than that. And that's what missionaries are going through. So Steve's not able to go and do the work God's called him to do in the traditional sense. It's not safe for him to get on the airplane yet. And so he's still having to find creative ways to engage in the work of reaching the lost in Asia and around the world. So that, what things have you guys been doing innovatively to continue the work there?
Well, we have one guy that has been trying to set up some trainings over the past year or so and just kept hitting a brick wall. And one thing that the pandemic did, it forced everyone online. But what that did for him is it forced the training, so to speak.
Oh,
so he's got the training taking place. This is in a very restricted country. So he's got the training taking place. He's mentoring multiple people, people in multiple countries from multiple countries. And they're actually seeing multiplication already. So this group, which really is you could call it a Zoom church, since where all these people are at, they can't meet in person, even currently. They've been able to meet weekly, and even one of the people was able to go out and start a Bible study with a small group of Muslims. And so you've got things like that. We've dipped our hand a little bit further into the humanitarian type work, which isn't our primary work.
Right.
It's not our focus. I don't think that should ever be our primary focus. I think it's something that we should do as believers, but ultimately we want to see the gospel spread. But we have been doing that, especially in South Asia, where people are lacking food, lacking money, lacking jobs, and the daily wage earners, as they're called, they don't have a savings account. They don't have a cupboard full of food. They don't have a refrigerator full of food. They can't go to Costco and stock up on toilet paper and things like that.
Yeah, and they probably don't have a government that sends them a stimulus check either, So
exactly. And while the government's done some, and I think they've improved on what they've done, there's still areas where what they're promising the local people, they're not providing. And so our people have been out there trying to fill in some gaps as best as we can in the communities they serve in.
That's right. I mean, we're called to feed and clothe and all that. But I know your organization, that's not your primary emphasis, but that is part of sharing the gospel and loving people. And I'm really glad to see Silk Road Catalyst stepping up in that way and helping where you can. And that's good stuff. But most importantly, I'm glad to see that the training's taking place, that they have more time and they're able to connect with one another online and continue the work of multiplying believers in places where they don't hear the gospel. So when we're talking about Asia, and I don't want to compare them to America, but I think there are some things going on in Asia and in the church in Asia that can really influence us in America as the church. How have those believers in Asia, how have they responded to this?
So, multiple countries, multiple scenarios, multiple economic conditions from China to India. In general, I think compared to the U.S., there's been a lot of similarities in certain areas. They've been, one thing I've seen in India specifically that I've really been impressed by is the number of churches stepping up. And we're talking about churches that don't have large bank accounts. And, a lot of them have people in there that are not wealthy by any means. But, a lot of these churches are stepping up and giving through what they have to help those migrants who are walking thousands of kilometers to get home and out of the city due to the pandemic and the lockdowns. We're seeing churches in China who are stepping up when many were shipping masks and supplies to them when they were in the hot seat. When it got better for them, they started shipping masks and supplies globally.
Yeah, did you guys get that mission, Motivation Family? Do you hear that? I mean, where the pandemic started, they're actually sending stuff to help us in America. You believe that? Go ahead, Steve. That's just been remarkable to see it. And
Yeah, and there was one church, I won't share where this church is at, but they shipped us, our team in South Asia, 1,400 masks completely on their own.
Right.
They've shipped them to the U.S., thousands and thousands of masks. This is a church, a single church,
Wow.
a network of believers. They have been trying to send them to the Middle East. They've been trying to send them as best as they could. And here we had another friend in another part of China step up and say, here's 200 masks. What can you do with that?
Wow.
And so we're just seeing them step up because the one thing about Asian community, you could even say from Asia, East Asia to the Middle East, one thing you see across the board is they're more communal in their outlook on life than we are in the U.S. We're very individualistic. We think of ourselves first. We vote based on our personal feelings. Everything is based on us first. When they make decisions over there, and there are some exceptions to that rule, and there are a few changes with the younger generation, but generally deep ingrained in the Asian cultures is this idea that we think of our community first. How does it affect our community? And so they're very quick to respond when someone, I mean, we had friends where we used to live in Asia. We've had 200 masks, 225 masks shipped to us by friends from that area because they were concerned about what is going on in the U.S. with the pandemic, and they were concerned about some other things that are transpiring. And so
comes up in my mind that why should we care about what's going on in Asia and the church in Asia? Because they care about us. Do y'all see that? They care so much about what's going on in America. And I think we should feel the same way. It should be mutual, and we shouldn't feel like we need to take care of us first and not worry about the rest. God's called us to the ends of the earth, not just America, not just New York City or somewhere like that. But God wants us to get a global vision for the world. And Silk Road Catalyst has had that vision. I've seen Steve live it out, guys. Steve is really doing the work, and he's showing me what the brothers and sisters in Asian countries are doing, and it's encouraging me. So what lessons do you think we can learn as the church in America, looking at the church in Asia?
And, I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking from a general vantage point, not necessarily just the pandemic, but it definitely ties into it. I think the number one thing that came to mind was suffering. I was listening to a podcast this morning of a couple of guys I know, and one of them said the theology of suffering, something that in America we need to develop. And there's a number of people that I know that are speaking more about this. It's becoming a bigger topic in the missional world of taking what we've learned from places like Asia, the Middle East, parts of Africa, especially Northern Africa, where there's persecution, and creating a theology of suffering and embracing a theology of suffering in the U.S. Because, let's be honest, we're not persecuted for our faith. I mean, if I hear anyone say we're persecuted for our faith, I'll be honest, I roll my eyes because we just don't experience it.
That's right.
And yeah, I'm not going to say there's never a difficulty, and there's never anyone who doesn't speak against Christians in the U.S. But the reality, I don't feel threatened when I walk down the street that because I'm a Christian, I have to think, is someone going to arrest me or is someone going to attack me? It's just not a thought. I'm not worried about it here. And so we need to create a theology of suffering. And I think one of the reasons he mentioned that was because this pandemic is bringing out the best and the worst in everyone in every country. Not just the U.S., but in India, China, Middle East, everywhere, it's bringing out the best and the worst. And one of the things that I have seen is in Asia, largely, at least from my vantage point, and I'll just say it's from my vantage point only, is I don't see a lot of Christians complaining in those areas. Yes, they don't like the lockdowns. Yes, they don't like the quarantines. They don't like necessarily what their government's doing, but they're adapting and they're adjusting as best as they can. I don't think in America, and especially anywhere in the West, whether it be here, Europe, Australia, we just don't know suffering as well. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when crises do come, I don't know that we know how to handle it as well on a personal level. And so we want to really get back to our norm as quick as possible. And I really think if we watch them in Asia or any place where persecution and suffering is a norm, then that is a topic we need to learn from them very quickly and well. We can't teach them how to suffer. We just can't.
Exactly. I mean,
but we can learn from them.
And we feel bad when we're stuck in a house for 3 months, but just imagine the suffering that they endure even before the pandemic. So they really had learned to suffer. And we in America, if we don't have AC in our car, we think that we're in hell. You know, we think that our lives are just terrible because the AC doesn't work, or, you know, the person at the restaurant gets our order wrong, and we get so angry about that one. So I think thinking about what they're going through in Asia really puts me in perspective with my thinking and my complaining. You know, what do I have to complain about? And there are some things that are legitimately uncomfortable in our lives, right, Steve? I mean, it's just that way. But when you think about what they're going through, it really is an encouragement to us. So how can we pray specifically for believers and unbelievers right now during this time?
I mean, I would pray that God would, pray that God would just continue to strengthen them. I'm not saying that they're all just, happy. Look, we're suffering. Look at us. Everything's, we know so much. I don't know anyone like that over there. I know all of them would love to live in an environment where they didn't have to fear for being a Christian or going hungry or anything. None of them want to go through this. They've just learned how to do it well, or at least better than us in many respects. So I would just pray that God would continue to strengthen them so they can continue to persevere, that they would be able to, in what they're going through, be able to show that to the lost world so they can be able to share the gospel with them, that God would provide. I mean, there's many opportunities to give that can help these people both personally and in their ministries. But, God isn't just the provider of American Christians. He is the provider of Indian, Chinese, Indonesian, Middle Eastern Christians as well. He cares about their situation just as much as he cares about ours. And if he can provide for us, he can provide for them. So we need to, be praying that God would open up doors and that God would strengthen their faith to be able to trust that he will provide miraculously. And also that, as it goes to us as well, I would pray that we would be open to learning. I would say it's very similar to what these riots, in a similar way to the riots in the U.S. The whole situation is you have a community, the African American community, or people of color, whether it be Black, Hispanic, Asian, feeling like the white community is not listening to them. And I know it goes much deeper than just that simple example, but there's a level of a lack of learning on the side of my community in a broad way, but in the same way, there's in the church, in a similar way, we're not listening to our brothers and sisters abroad, and we need to learn. So pray that we would take on a heart of humility to learn from them, to be intentional, because we could learn a lot from them. And I mean, every week, the last couple of months, I'm beginning online with our team, and most of them are not Americans, and I'm just learning stuff from them and learning about their life. And it is really inspiring many times. It is really convicting at times. And so, we need to be praying for us as well, that we would take on that heart of humility and learning from them, but also that they would continue strong, because they have so much to give to the kingdom and so much to give in those communities in terms of their life and we don't want them to give up. We want them to persevere, and to be able to get the gospel to those who have literally never heard it one time.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if those in the Motivation family who are watching this really understand that we in America, we're privileged to hear about Jesus. I mean, it's just most people in America know what the VBS is, Vacation Bible School, and we have our leaders that rely on the Christian base to get their power in America. So in America, we're just inundated with the Christian influence, and I don't think we can really fully grasp living in a country where Christianity is not prevalent. And Steve, we know that you spent a lot of time in many areas in Asia, and you see what it looks like, and it does not look like it does in America with a church on every corner. So we do need to remember our brothers and sisters in Asia who are legitimately the minority when it comes to religion in that area. Because in the Middle East, it's dominated by Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and some other flavors in between, right, Steve? But their prevalent religion is not Christianity, and we need to remember that. And as we pray, and Steve, you really encouraged me, brother. I thank you for your friendship and your love for me and my family. And you've really taught me a lot about how to love those in the 1040 window that have never heard the gospel. And it just breaks my heart. Here I am, in a wheelchair. I can't go, and you have went. And I just enjoy being a part of praying for you as you go. And so, Steve, tell our Motivation family how we can help Silk Road Catalyst. Do you have a website? Where can we go? How can we give? What can we do?
Yeah, so our website is silkroadcatalyst.com. And one of the things I'm going to start pushing very soon is raising money for our what's called Global South Missionary. So a Global South Missionary is a non-Western missionary that comes from Latin America, Asia, Middle East, and Africa. So I'm putting together a way for people to give directly into that. One of the things, recently we started a fund called the Silk Road Fund, and that's used for projects, like humanitarian work. And a number of people have been giving to that, and we're very thankful. But in setting that up, I forgot to mention, if we don't support the missionaries doing the work, well, guess what? The work actually doesn't get done.
Exactly.
And so we're also setting up this other fund that's specific to help them. So all the money is going to be to support, in part, not fully, but in part, the families, because they need to be cared for. They need health insurance. They need to put food on the table. It's not just the projects where we're putting food on the tables of lost people. We've got to take care of the ones who are doing the work.
Absolutely.
And so Global South missionaries tend not to have as many avenues of support raising as a Westerner might have. And so we've created this Global South Missionary Fund to support them. It's not on our website yet. I'm working on that to get it up on there. And so that's really something I want people to start considering. Monthly giving, one-time gift, whether it's $5 a month or whatever, to really consider getting behind these missionaries, because God is doing some incredible work among them.
Amen. And people, the Motivation family, you guys know that I never talk about supporting anything financially on the program, but this, I believe in Steve. I believe in the work Steve's doing. I believe in what God's called him to do. And I really want to encourage you, if you add some extra money, guys, and you're wondering, how can I bless someone? These people doing the work in Asia really need your support. So if you would think about it, pray about it, go to silkroadcatalyst.com and think about using some of your stimulus money to help out the believers in Asia who are an extension of you. Just think of it as an extension of your work of leading people to Christ. You want to be a soul winner, right? You want to see people come to Jesus in America, but think about those of our brothers and sisters who want to see their community come to Christ and what God's called them to do. So, guys, think about supporting Silk Road Catalyst. Get involved. Also, Steve, you have a booklet that they could get, and tell us a little bit about that before we leave.
Well, I don't call it a booklet. I call it a book.
Well, excuse me.
It's an ebook. We don't have a hard copy at this point. I just haven't decided to do that. Oh, there it goes. So you can see the cover on my phone works on tablets as well. We have them in Kindle, e-reader, and also PDF versions. It's completely free. The type Legitimacy and Missions Matters, Mike Falkenstein, I don't know if he's still with us, but he wrote the foreword to it. And he's also written a couple of books as well that are really good. And so this really came out of living in Asia and studying how missionaries live and serve in Asia on a practical side, not the ministry side.
Right.
And so I wrote this book out of that because of how things are, and at that time it was really how things were changing in more of one country, but didn't realize how it was going to impact or how it would relate to so many countries today. And so, for anyone interested in learning, or anyone interested in being a missionary, or they support missionaries, or anything in that realm, this is a short book. It's about 35 pages. And I talk about what I think we need to really take seriously in our practical approach of entering these countries as missionaries, not so much necessarily from a support side, but just in how we present ourselves to the governments, to the visa officers, to the local communities. And I'll just share this one little thing, but you'll have to read the book to understand what I'm talking about. But I call it the Rahab Approach in the book of Joshua, where Rahab was lying to protect Israeli spies. And so in many cases, we have taken that passage and turned it into a theology to support certain ways we enter as missionaries. And I've actually gotten to the point where I advocate a different way. And so this book is about that. So I would encourage you to read it and pass it on. You don't even have to request. You can request it from me and then pass it on to someone else completely free. If you want to, give to support creating resources, that's great, but it's not necessary.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Steve, for sharing with the Motivation family. And we're going to go take some prayer requests. And then we'll invite you back up to either Krispy Kreme donut on the camera and tell us how you like it. No, I'm telling you. Well, I'm just kidding. We'll invite you back up to pray over our request, if you would, in just a few minutes.